Hey everybody, welcome back to the second episode of reviewing all 200 vinyl records that I own. In today's album, we're going to be looking at AC/DC's debut, High Voltage. And for an update, I have a little furry friend. He might be meowing in the background for some of these videos. This is EJ. As per usual, we have the three categories. We have context, we have songs, and then of course we have the album cover art. Those all three are going to be ranked, put together for a final score, see how it ranks out of 15 points. So starting off with context, this is the debut album of AC/DC. However, it wasn't technically the debut in general. Now this is the first album released worldwide as the debut for AC/DC, but they actually released two albums before that, just in Australia and New Zealand only. So it was kind of an interesting introduction because this first album is kind of a conglomerate of all the other songs from the first two Australian only albums, and then just kind of threw it all on here and then made this album. Now the original lineup of this band was Bon Scott, Angus and Malcolm Young, Mark Evans, and Phil Rudd. Now, the album itself peaked at 146 on the Billboard charts. Now, as a debut album, that's nothing new. A lot of debut albums struggle to chart well. It's very unlikely for it to rank highly, but it still provided us with some of the classic songs that we still listen to today, that we know them for, and they still perform live. Now, as this would lead to them having worldwide acclaim, it does show a cool starting point for this band and to see where they'll grow. However, context-wise, I feel like because it is just a hodgepodge of songs from just their earlier work, it kind of doesn't really give the album a good context because there's nothing creatively pushing them other than they're just growing into a rock band. So yeah, the songs kind of, have just their middling aspect to them. So overall context, I would probably give it 2 out of 5. Nothing crazy, nothing memorable or nostalgic they say about the creative process. It pretty much is they went in the studio, they made the songs, then they released them. Now on to the songs themselves. I think the most noticeable track is probably the opener, which is It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll, which is an extremely long title. I don't know why they did that. Anyway, it's a really interesting introduction to the band because you're chumming along in this really good rock song, and then out of nowhere come bagpipes, and the choice to use that in a rock song in the 70s is an interesting choice because you already had great bands in the 70s playing great rock music. You had the Eagles, you had the Stones, you had Led Zeppelin, and they chose as their introduction to the world was to play bagpipes on the first song. While people might think that's weird, I actually think they succeeded with that. I actually really enjoy that track. And apparently the context behind that is just they knew that Bon Scott used to play bagpipes as a kid, so they made him play it for the song. Interesting choice, and I think it paid off. Of course, the other synonymous track with this album is TNT, which to this day is probably their top 3, in the top 3 for most played AC/DC songs. Everyone knows that song. First attempt making a really good 4/4 rock song, they succeeded with that one. I will say overall, the lyrics for pretty much all the songs are not the best. They're still getting and growing creatively. I mean, I think their guitar playing work is really good, as well as the drumming is also really, really nice. But overall, I would say the songs are pretty much just meddling songs about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Finally, another track that people really, really like on this album is the final track, or the title track, High Voltage. The only interesting thing about that is the drummer Phil Rudd wasn't the drummer for that song. He was a session musician, which is interesting because it is a pretty good drumming track as well as a really good guitar solo, I feel like, is on that. Also about High Voltage, I think it's pretty interesting because it's still a very popular track that they play live. I think that's also, overall this album, what amazes me about it is the fact that TNT and High Voltage are still played at their live shows. So this first album had such an impact that it's still being used today, because a lot of artists just use their newer discography. They still go back to the basics on their live shows. However, I will say, obviously they're in their 70s, but the new singer, Brian Johnson, I think his name is, I would feel bad for people paying to listen to him try to sing. But overall, I didn't really care for too many of the other tracks. I would say actually the only 2 songs I liked were the beginning track and then TNT. Everything else I really, really didn't like, especially the Jack and She's Got Balls. This category is probably the weakest for this album. Overall songs with 9 total tracks, and I only like 2 of them. It bumps the score to a 1.1 out of 5 in this category. So very, very weak on the music side for me, but that's just me, and not a shame on AC/DC. I think they're more of a hits band rather than a consistent album type band. But finally, in the final category, we have album cover art. And I will say, this album cover art is actually one of my favorites. I think, when I think of AC/DC, I immediately think of this cover. And I also love the fact that, you know, the outfit that he's wearing is still an outfit that they wear today in their live shows. So it just shows, like, this was a very impactful album. I mean, it didn't show that on the charts, but, like, truthfully, I think when people see this, even someone who doesn't really listen to albums, they know, at least TNT's on here, they know this is a pretty synonymous picture of what AC/DC is all about. So I would give this album cover a 4 out of 5. I actually really, really like this. The only thing that doesn't make it a perfect 5 out of 5 is I think the album cover is not doing as much for the songs. I think it's carrying the weight of the music because it does show high voltage. Like, I like the lightning bolt, but other than that, it's not like meaningful. It's just a really cool picture. So with adding up all the scores of the 3 categories, we have decided that High Voltage is getting a 7.1 out of 15. Now, that's a pretty good right in the middle score, and surprisingly, it actually ranks higher than our last album that we just talked about with ABBA by pretty much a whole point. So it's pretty interesting that I liked less songs on this, and yet the scores still seem to have made it out that it's ranked higher for me. What's also interesting is that, you know, in the next episode that we're going to be doing a follow-up, AC/DC's Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. That's such a fun title. And it'll be interesting to see how this scores up against that, because this was the direct follow-up. So tune in for that video. That will be the next album ranking that I have here. And if you do want to get into AC/DC more, you know, check out this album still. I will say, in 1976, you know, this was their debut. I think it's hard for me to like it a little bit more because of all the other great rock albums that were coming out in 1976. I feel like 4/4 rock music can only be so good. I think this is truly, I'm in it for the hits. I say still check it out if you're interested, because it's the start of something really, really great. And I'm excited to see how it grows from there. Also, please like, comment, subscribe, you know, do the normal stuff on this channel, watch all the other content that these creators make. So once again, yeah, tune into the next episode. Hopefully you enjoyed my cat. I'll show him a video of him over this right now. And yeah, have a great one.